Well, Arkansas has a rich history when it comes to apples, and we sat down with celebrity historian Raffi Andonian to dig into the story behind the state's orchards and traditions. Take a look.
Did you know that apples once played a huge role in the history of Northwest Arkansas? Today we're talking about the fascinating story of apples with celebrity historian Raffi Andonian. Thank you very much for these gifts.
You brought us an apple.
Yes,
thank you.
I feel like a teacher.
Come bearing fruit.
All right, let's talk about apple in the history of apples in Arkansas.
Yeah, it's the apple belt of you could say the world right here in Northwest Arkansas and the Ozark Plateau. Believe it or not, at one point, Washington County and Benton County together were the two largest apple-producing counties in the world.
Oh, wow.
In the world, believe it or not. So this is kind of an apple epicenter, if you will. This is between 1880 and 1920. We're talking about the peak when they had 5 million bushels coming out of here, tens of thousands of acres. So really, yes, absolutely, played a major role in this region's history. In fact, if you go to the University of Arkansas, of course, in their agriculture program, the apple program still exists because of that legacy. So it still kind of plays a role here.
That's so cool.
Let's talk about that crop. Why was it such an important crop here in the late 1800s, early 1900s?
Well, initially it doesn't start that way. So in the middle 19th century, you have, apples just being grown because you have nurseries that are taking place as you have European settlers and, of course, the subsequent generations after the Civil War, growing stuff. Initially, the surplus was going with firefighters that might kind of travel out of the region. So it was just kind of like haphazard. But when they get connected to the railroad is when you start to have the ability to transport. And because the soil conditions are so good to be able to grow it at scale, and they could do it before too, but you didn't need to when the market wasn't there, right?
Sure.
But when you have access to those markets and so many varieties of apples can grow here, Arkansas Black being the most famous one. And in 1904 actually was featured at the St. Louis World Fair. So they're also promoting it, right? There's a World's Fair promoting it, marketing, and then of course the accessibility with the railroad allows for maximizing that potential with the soil capability here for apples.
And then you can ship it out.
That's right, you can ship it out, and hence why it becomes a commercial industry as opposed to something that was being grown locally with some extras going off with the firefighters.
Right.
What other kinds of apples were common in this region, and do any of them still grow here today?
Yeah, you do have many that still grow here. There's the pippin, that's a local Arkansas one, yes. I would say, though, the apple legacy here continues more through distilling, for example, right? So you have the cideries, right? You have apple brandy. And what's interesting about that is that's actually an example of supporting industries that popped up. Because anytime you have a major industry, they're supporting stuff. And the cider stuff, the drying of apples, the brandy, there were dozens of these distilleries actually, for vinegar also, that were here for a century. If you think about Prohibition, of course, affected that. But that has a legacy here. In addition, other funny like supplementary industries came up, like barrel making, because you're shipping the apples in barrels, right? So it's not always about the apples, it's what they're traveling in. But the other thing I would say about in apples and today is sort of the flavor still exists, and it's kind of a specialty. However, the major commercial stuff, of course, in the United States has moved to the Pacific Northwest. And there was a few different reasons for that, one of which was the Dust Bowl affected this region, and that affected the crop. There were also bugs and insects that affected it. And there was eventually sort of this move towards making too similar of apples, so that when insects came, it really affected a massive amount of crop because there was not enough diversity.
That makes sense. So you just mentioned like our friends at Black Apple Cidery in downtown Springdale. They're making some great stuff. There's apple brandy distilleries in the state. How is that history, that legacy, how is it being preserved today?
Well, the way I would think about it being preserved today is by consumption. So to me, think of it this way, right? So you have multiple distilleries here today, right? And to me, the way I think of it is, it's like going to grandma's house. When you go to grandma's house, how do you connect to the past? You taste, right? Think about how often family recipes go through grandparents and then on to different generations, and you feel like you're connecting to the past by tasting, recreating those flavors and those dishes. So the way I would say that it's preserved today is by not only like actually consuming an apple, but actually consuming apple products that are made here in Northwest Arkansas in a variety of their forms.
I like that.
I love it.
For sure. Well, I think I'm going to consume. I'm going to have a bite.
Are you going to consume?
I'm going to preserve apples in Northwest Arkansas.
Preserve it in your tummy.
Yes, that's right. Stay with us. We've got more Good Day NWA coming up right after this.